Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar, which is part of the Global Services Forum. My name is Nano Mulder. I am the Chief of the International Trade Unit within the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean. And again, it is a great honor to welcome you in this webinar, which topic is more resilient and sustainable tourism for the post-pandemic recovery. This theme, of course, is very important, in particular in the context of the current pandemic, because no sector of the economy was more hurt by this virus, by the COVID-19 virus, than tourism. So it is very timely and very necessary to really take stock of how the tourism sector is doing now that we are about 1.5 years into the pandemic. And today we will hear different testimonies of participants from different developing regions with regards to the recovery in their respective region regarding the tourism activity. And we will also hear different testimonies and recommendations of important international organizations, and also from some people representing specific countries regarding recommendations on how to increase the resilience and also the sustainability of this particular sector. And I would like to now please give the floor to Diane Corliss, who is the director of the Office of the Caribbean of ECLAC in Port of Spain, for some opening remarks. Please, Diane, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nano, and good morning to all. It is my pleasure to participate in this event, given the very serious and continuing challenges that COVID-19 presents to the tourism sector globally, as Nano has outlined. Allow me to convey, first of all, on behalf of ECLAC, special thanks to our colleague agencies, UNTAD and UNIDO, and other partners for organizing, I think, a very important session in this Global Services Forum. International tourism is now at a critical juncture, and it is more important than ever for us to work together, to learn from each other so that we can rebuild a more dynamic and resilient tourism sector for the future. There can be no denying the importance of tourism to small, undiversified, service-based economies, typical of so many small island developing states, not least those in my region here in the Caribbean. As Barbados is hosting the 15th session of UNTAD, I think it is fitting that I use the experiences of the Caribbean tourism-dependent economies to demonstrate the formidable challenge that the devastation of the industry has presented to these countries. It is not an exaggeration to say that tourism is the lifeblood of the majority of countries of the sub-region who depend on the sector for economic growth, for economic livelihoods, and as a primary source of foreign exchange. Tourism direct contribution to GDP in the wider Caribbean averaged 12% in 2019. Its indirect contribution through linkages to the rest of the economy was even greater than that. Tourism accounts for one in every six jobs in the Caribbean, the majority of which are held by women. The substantial role that women play in this services sector therefore underscores the significant gender impact that such a shock to the sector, as we have experienced with COVID-19, can have on welfare. And it is truly a shock that we have experienced in the Caribbean. The early response to the pandemic came in the form of border closures, travel restrictions. We all are very much aware of that. This grounded activity in March and April of 2020, our stayover arrivals dropped to 0.3% of what they were in 2019. And efforts to reopen throughout the year result in it going only to 22% by the end of the year. So overall, tourism fell by 67% in the Caribbean on average in 2020. And we have not had that much recovery so far this year. We are at 18% of stayover arrivals in March of this year compared to March of 2019. Nevertheless, as Nano says, we are hoping and looking forward to opportunities for robust recovery in this sector. And of course, central to this recovery is going to be the containment of the virus, both at the national level and across international source markets. A sustained campaign promoting vaccinations and addressing vaccine hesitancy concerns through support and education will lay the foundation for reviving the sector. In addition, rigorous protocols to support both guests and workers are also necessary. Given its vulnerability to natural disasters, governments, in collaboration with tourism stakeholders locally, nationally, regionally, must also bolster the disaster risk management capacity within the tourism sector. Such strategies should aim to reduce the vulnerability to natural disasters and ensure sustainable recovery following these events. The achievement of long-term regeneration of the tourism sector also hinges on the implementation of policy frameworks, generating new streams of revenue and increasing efficiency of public support. It will also rely on supporting private sector financing to fill critical financing gaps at a time when governments must deal with increasingly limited fiscal space as public debt skyrockets. The beauty of natural environment is also a major attraction for tourists. So it is important for us to take action to protect and enhance the resilience of nature-based resources. Future tourism plans should ensure that the number of tourists arriving is kept within the environment's carrying capacity. The tourism sector also constitutes a large leakage of foreign exchange, often due to generous incentives to the sector. So in a shift towards sustainability, tourism operators should be incentivized to increase the local content used in the production by working with and supporting local communities. Sustainable local food and beverages can be used in the industry to reduce the carbon footprint and serve as niches, important niches for the eco-conscious tourist. Secretary General Guterres has asked for a coordinated, multi-agency, multi-sectoral response to address the socioeconomic impacts of COVID-19. Given the central role that tourism plays in our sub-region, we at ECLAC have responded to this suggestion by initiating a project focused on identifying the major impacts of the pandemic on the tourism sector and those industries which provide goods and services to the sector. This is important, a project to support financial investment, capacity building, institutional strengthening to help Caribbean economies rebuild their affected sectors. The focus will be on improving competitiveness and supporting sustainability. Our goal is to expand the knowledge and understanding of the stakeholders on the impact of the pandemic on select tourism-related sectors. Working collectively, I'm hopeful that we can rebuild the tourism sector to attain dynamism that has supported the economies around the world for decades. However, we must do so focused on building resilience to climate change, natural disasters, including pandemics, so that we promote a long-term sustainability of the sector. The panelists lined up for this morning's discussion promise a superior exchange in our search for these urgent solutions. I therefore look forward to the sharing of ideas in this forum. May they contribute to the sector's long-term growth and development. Thank you very much. Over to you now.
Thank you, Diane, for these excellent welcome words. I would also like to remind everybody that we have simultaneous translation. So at the bottom of your screen, on the right-hand side, you can find the globe and underneath saying interpretation, where you can both listen to this session in either English or Spanish. Okay, now we move to the second person to open this session, which is Ms. Mio Shirotori. She's the officer in charge of the Division on International Trade and Commodities of UNCTAD. Ms. Mio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nano. As Diane had set the scene so effectively with this her comprehensive opening remarks, I will not take too much time here with my opening remarks. Um, as I just would like to first of all welcome everyone to this Global Services Forum 2021, and of course to this session on building a more resilient and sustainable tourism. Like you said, Nano, and also Diane stated, the tourism stands out as one of the sectors most affected by COVID-19. Without COVID-19, we would have been in Barbados already preparing for UNCTAD 15. That would have been so much nicer, probably, to have this virtual meeting, although I do like virtual meeting as well, but nothing can really win over Barbados. Anyway, from the trade point of view, tourism accounts for 50% of total exports for many small economies, particularly small island developing states, such as those in the Caribbean region. A recent UNCTAD study highlighted, in fact, that the global economy could lose over $4 trillion due to this COVID-19 impact only on tourism. When can we get back to normal again? According to the United Nations World Tourism Organization, a return to pre-COVID-19 international tourist arrival levels is not expected until 2023 or even maybe later. So this is particularly harsh given that prior to the pandemic, the tourism sector was seen as an important engine for stimulating a wide range of economic activities and for achieving multiple SDG targets. This is because, as you have already said and Diane commented, tourism provides real jobs, thus income to the local economy. In addition to that, tourism also incentivizes, or to an extent subsidizes, the building of necessary infrastructure like roads, like energy, all other infrastructure that would be quite important for a country's overall development. So at this stage, let us remind ourselves that despite the difficult times we are in, tourism can remain a driving force for local social inclusion, benefiting youth and women in particular, and small and medium-sized enterprises, local communities, and rural populations. With this in mind, I look forward to today's discussion that addresses so many important questions, including which best practices can show us the ways to increase the resilience and sustainability of tourism. Thank you very much. I now hand back to you, Mr. Mulder.
Thank you, Ms. Shirotori, for your also excellent opening remarks. And again, as ECLAC, we very much appreciate all the collaboration with UNCTAD in organizing this Global Services Forum and these specific sessions. And of course, also the other partner like the CAS Foundation, ALIS, and other partners that are part of this event. Now with this opening remarks, I would like to go on to the next part of this session, which is the panel and the introduction to the panel. And for the introduction to the panel, I would please like to give the floor to Mr. Next Juice, and he is from the World Tourism and Travel Council. And he will say a few words regarding trends among the developing regions regarding the partial recovery in the tourism industry, and also some good examples and protocols that have been put into place and recommended by WTTC to promote the recovery of the sustainable tourism activity. So please, Next, the floor is yours. 5 minutes, please. Next, are you there, Mr. Just? Mr. Just, are you there? There's maybe some technical issue with his internet connection. So if Mr. Just apparently he is not able to open his microphone. And so I would like then move on to the panel. So we have some very distinguished speaker for our panel today. And I would like to thank all of them for having accepted to participate in it. And we will listen to the views of some very distinguished members of the panel, who I will name now. The first is Mr. Graham Harper. He is the PATA Sustainable and Social Responsibility Officer of the PATA, which is the Pacific Asia Travel Association. So he will provide a view from Asia. After that, we will listen to Mr. Geoffrey Manyara. He is an Economic Affairs Officer for Tourism of the Sub-Regional Office for Eastern Africa of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, UN-ECA, which is a sister commission of UN-ECLAC. After that, we will pass the floor on to Alejandro Varela, who is the Deputy Director of the UN WTO, the World Tourism Organization, Americas Department. And then we will move to a view from the region of the Caribbean and listen to Ms. Michelle McLeod. And she is a lecturer of the University of the West Indies and also part of the COVID-19 task force of that university. And she is from Jamaica. And this round of intervention will be closed by a short presentation by Leila Peralta. And she's an Economic Affairs Officer of our office, the ECLAC office in Mexico City. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor, please, to Mr. Graham Harper of the Pacific Asia Travel Association. And please ask him if he can provide some insights on just a very quick update regarding trends in the Asian and Pacific regions regarding tourism, and some words on the responsibility you have regarding initiatives to promote the environmental and social sustainability in the part of your global tourism plastics initiative in Asia. So maybe if you can just go as a funnel, tell something about trends, then the efforts PATA is implementing regarding sustainability, and maybe say a few specific words regarding the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative in Asia, which I think is very interesting. So please, Graham, 6-7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and it's definitely a pleasure to be here. Let's be honest. Travel and tourism has been decimated, and nothing more so than in the Asia-Pacific region. If anything, the COVID pandemic has highlighted so clearly the dependencies and the vulnerabilities that our industries face. And the talk that just so far from the opening remarks on the focus on resilience of our industry is crucial. Really, a lot of what we're doing right now and what we've been doing over the past year and a half is absolutely focused on increasing resilience. Now, this is very much based on the understanding that destinations cannot be sustainable if they're not first resilient. Building resiliency is really the foundation of developing sustainable tourism in our destinations. Now, the moderator asked about the Global Plastics and Tourism Initiative. And, it is a UNWTO and UNEP initiative. And PATA has been a proud signatory of the GTPI for the past 2 years. Now, this is really trying to focus in on, what are potentially problematic plastics. Now, problematic plastics are the ones that are not easy to recycle. Problematic plastics are the ones that get left behind in inadequate waste management systems. And if we really want to make the impact through plastics, then what we need to do is we need to go back to our destinations, and we really need to focus on what kind of infrastructures do they have? What kind of governance structures do they have? And if we really want to tackle plastics, then we have to start at those levels, at the destination level, because it's by building up the sustainability, by building up the governance, by building up the resilience within our destinations, that we can start to improve the tourist offerings, the ability to bounce back, and really not just bounce back, but bounce forward from what COVID has brought to us. What we see is that by doing this with destinations, and Miho earlier was talking about the impact that tourism can have on the infrastructure, and that is so true. What we call tourism-driven infrastructure can have substantial, exponential impacts on the lives of the people within those communities. Now, just going back again to the plastics, we cannot take that in isolation. Any of these issues, plastics, carbon, food waste, waste management, any of them, we have to look in a holistic view and see the connections between these different issues. One such is just the rise in single-use plastics since the pandemic has come about. Even though we're hoping to battle plastics, it's been stepping back over the last few years. Now, currently, what PATA is working on is a tourism destination resilience program. And it's a mixture of both online learning modules, online resource library, but more importantly, working in destinations in local language with cities to help them prepare the risk assessments, the risk management strategies, and the adaptive capacities to be able to have the ability to change with the situations so that they can build the resilience in the path towards sustainable tourism development. This has kicked off, the main part that we're doing right now kicked off in May, and we're going to be launching a number of risk exposure indexes, destination resilience assessment tools, et cetera, in December of this year. More of the information about this program and hopefully the rollout to many more destinations will be progressing throughout 2022. But all of this just goes back to that real foundation that no matter what we do with plastics or food waste or carbon, we will never achieve sustainability in tourism until first we ensure that our destinations are resilient. And I think that's the key point that we really need to keep looking at. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Graham, for these very good remarks regarding the importance of resilience for the tourism sector. And really, that is the foundation also to work whatever initiative regarding sustainability. Thank you for that. And I would like to pass the floor now on to Nex from the World Travel and Trade Council. I hope you are online now. I know you lost connections, but please, I hope you can give your introduction to the panel right now.
Sure, thank you. And first of all, my apologies. I have lost internet connection. It always happens at the wrong time. So my apologies again. And thank you so much for inviting me and of course, WTTC, World Travel and Tourism Council, to participate in this important session. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a significant toll on communities across the world and has had a devastating effect on the sector. Our WTTC data shows that in 2019, travel and tourism was one of the world's largest sectors, accounting for 10.4% of global GDP and supported 334 million jobs. It was also responsible for creating 1 in 4 of all net new jobs across the world. As a result of the pandemic and the ongoing restrictions to international mobility, the travel and tourism sector suffered losses of almost $4.5 trillion, with its global contribution to GDP declining by 49% compared to 2019. This is relative to a 3.7% GDP decline of the global economy. In 2020, 62 million jobs were lost. This 19% decrease was felt across the entire travel and tourism ecosystem, with SMEs, which make up 80% of all global businesses in the sector, being particularly affected, alongside women, youth, and minorities. And millions of the remaining 272 million jobs that are currently supported by government retention schemes and reduced working hours could be lost without a full recovery of the sector. Overall, the recovery this year has been slow so far and uneven across regions and countries. In general, destinations that have remained open throughout the pandemic or made announcements in advance of key tourism periods, and those destinations that kept travel restrictions consistent and easy to follow fared better in terms of international arrivals. Latest air data from our WTTC's knowledge partner ForwardKeys shows that while international arrivals globally in August were down by 83% versus the same month in 2019, there were regional disparities. The Middle East and Africa witnessed a drop of 72%, America 73%, Europe 77%, and Asia Pacific 98%, as many countries in that region have closed borders to international tourists. However, there are some geographic subregions and countries that have performed well over the recent summer season and were relatively close to 2019 levels. For instance, international arrivals in Mexico were down by just 7%. Looking at Europe, Greece, for example, was a standout performer, achieving 86% of 2019 July and August arrivals. It was followed by Cyprus, Turkey, and Iceland. It is also important to mention the strength of domestic tourism in some countries. For instance, domestic recovery has been relatively strong in China, Russia, and the US. And despite some green shoots of recovery in select subregions and destinations, the current year-to-date figures for international tourism are worrying. So we need to work collaboratively to safely reopen international borders as soon as possible. While the pandemic has had a devastating impact on our sector, there were a number of government policies that enabled travel and tourism recovery during COVID-19. It is important to know that tourism support measures need to address the survival of the sector whilst also enhancing its resilience and sustainability. We at WTTC have been monitoring the best government policies and examples with regards to travel facilitation, worker protection, liquidity, and fiscal support and incentivizing travel. I want to highlight a few select policies and practices that have effectively enabled travel and tourism and helped safeguard jobs in the wake of the pandemic. The European Union has led the way, setting a global example in how to restart the travel and tourism sector and make safe international travel possible in a harmonized way. In particular, it has taken the lead with the launch this summer of its digital COVID certificate. This is the first global example of where many countries have collaborated to produce a system for verifying COVID-19 status that is common and fully interoperable across all those countries. The UK is a great example of the government support scheme for workers. The scheme paid furloughed workers 80% of their pre-pandemic earnings, up to a maximum of $3,500 a month. On the other side of the world, in Argentina, for instance, in 2020, the Ministry of Tourism and Sports launched a program to incentivize domestic tourism consumption through a credit for future tourism consumption in 2021. Since Greece reopened its international borders for leisure travel following the first wave of COVID-19, it has been at the forefront in the use of a risk-based border management policy that includes looking at the risk an individual poses rather than imposing sweeping restrictive conditions of entry on all travelers from a country. To support the sector's recovery, there is a need for a coordinated, consistent, and transparent approach to enable safe travel. In this context, WTTC, alongside its members, governments, health experts, and other industry associations, work together to develop a harmonized and effective safe travel protocols for 11 industries across the travel and tourism sector to accelerate the recovery. Some of the countries in Central and Latin America that have received WTTC's safe travel stamp include Brazil, El Salvador, Nicaragua, Mexico, Peru, Ecuador, and Chile, amongst many others. We at the World Travel and Tourism Council are working tirelessly to restore international mobility, to accelerate the recovery of the sector and bring back millions of jobs to the economy. We are calling for governments to implement simplified rules for international travel that allow fully vaccinated citizens to travel without restrictions, irrespective of where they're coming from. Secondly, continue to develop and deploy digital solutions that enable travelers to prove their COVID status and ensure quick and easy travel through borders. Thirdly, recognition for international travel of all vaccines that have been authorized by the World Health Organization or the stringent regulatory authorities. And last but not least, recognize that international travel is safe with high quality health and safety standards, including the continued adoption of World Travel and Tourism's safe travel protocols. Also, COVID-19 has emphasized the urgency of building back better with sustainability, climate impact, destination stewardship, and social impact at the front and center. The outbreak has increased environmental awareness among consumers, and as such, sustainable tourism will become more prevalent. Destinations that protect nature, engage with local citizens, or offer an insider view into wildlife will attract a steady following. All in all, COVID-19 has caused us a lot of pain, but it has also opened up new opportunities, and it is up to us to embrace them as we look towards an even more sustainable and inclusive travel and tourism sector. And thanks again for inviting me to participate in this panel.
Thank you, Next, for this great overview of the tourism trends, which are still very, as we notice, very depressed, the current levels of tourism, except for a few countries that have been doing better in terms of their recovery. But overall, we are still at very low levels of recovery. Next, I would like to pass the floor on to Mr. Geoffrey Magnara of UNECA. And please, can you tell us something about how community-based tourism enterprises development increases the benefits of tourism for local communities in Africa? And maybe also add something about trends in tourism, the tourism recovery in your respective sub-region. Geoffrey, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for those introductory remarks, and having heard from my fellow panelists and on how tourism has affected, on how COVID, the pandemic has affected tourism across the world. And of course, Africa has not been spared. And perhaps before I go into the details about community-based tourism, I thought maybe I give some background about the importance of tourism in Africa. It's only in the past few decades that tourism has been prioritized in the African continent, with many more and more countries taking up the tourism sector. This has been as a result of the failure of traditional sectors such as agriculture, mining, to bring about meaningful development. And we've seen increasingly countries looking for alternative sources to help their countries develop. And as a result of that, the non-traditional countries have been embracing tourism significantly. Just to give you a brief history then about community-based tourism in Africa and how it has developed, this has been based on the fact that the product of the tourism product in Africa is actually predominantly nature-based. And The majority of the community-based tourism enterprises developed as a result of the conservation efforts that are being undertaken, and they need to ensure that communities benefit as a result. Some examples that common examples that have existed previously have been, for example, the Campfire Project in Zimbabwe, looking at basically Campfire Project refers to communal areas management program, whereby the project integrates the need to ensure the benefits go to local communities. We have examples, for example, in Kenya under the Cobra Project, which is the conservation of biodiverse resource areas, and also projects such as the conservation of resource through enterprise, the core projects. And most of these projects have actually been donor funded and bringing in on board communities to support conservation efforts. And I think the most important thing we need to strive here is the motivation for the majority of these projects has been the need to drive the conservation agenda. And that is why communities have been brought on board to ensure the sustainability of some of these projects. So having said that, I think it's important to note that unfortunately, a number of these community-based enterprises have actually collapsed over the past few years. One of the reasons being that the way they were conceived was not arguably holistic, in the sense that there was a lot of emphasis on the conservation agenda, because, as I say, that was the original motivating factor for the development of those enterprises. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, this has been one of the reasons why it has some of these enterprises have collapsed, and some of them actually were very notable examples that won international awards, and they've actually faced several challenges. Just to give you an example, why some of them have actually collapsed is that if you talk about the sustainable development, if you look at sustainability holistically, then you need to address issues related to environmental issues, issues related to socio-cultural matters, and of course, the economic dimension of sustainability. Now, if you only concentrate on one dimension of sustainability, then you're bound to have an imbalance, and that can lead to problems. And I think that's one of the reasons why these initiatives have collapsed as a result of that. So one of the ways to ensure the sustainability of these communities, therefore, to insist on having a balanced approach to sustainability, whereby you look at the three dimensions in equal terms. So you're looking at the economic dimension, ensuring that the economic aspect to it, the social cultural dimension, and also looking at the environmental dimensions all the same. Because otherwise, without doing so, you sort of compromise the sustainability of these projects. Now, having given that background, I thought also it was also important to give a picture about tourism in Africa, because that's where really these community initiatives fall. Of course, when you look at tourism in Africa compared to the rest of the world, it's actually quite small. In terms of, for example, Africa contributes just about 2% of the global GDP. And from the last analysis we did, this share of global GDP is actually declining. This is obviously a challenge for Africa, in the sense that we do recognize that Africa has a huge potential for tourism development that could actually benefit the local communities. And what the pandemic has actually done is to force African member states to think differently about tourism in Africa. One of the things has been that tourism, most member states in Africa have really concentrated on marketing their products in the traditional markets of the Western Europe and looking the Americas and so forth. And the trend has been that if you're a Francophone country, then your main markets tend to be France. If you're Anglophone countries, your main markets tend to be the Anglophone-speaking countries of the West, for example, the United Kingdom, United States, Australia, and so forth and so forth. Now, with the COVID, obviously, these markets collapsed. And of course, the community-based initiatives that heavily relied on these markets suffered as a result of that. And so what we're seeing, therefore, is that there is the need to rethink the approach in terms of community-based development. And one of the things we're looking at also to rethink the products that they offer. And I think that's why it's important to ensure when you talk about sustainability, to think about how this can actually be achieved. Just to mention quickly and talk about that in Africa now, we are focusing on the continental free trade area, and tourism has been identified as one of the key services sectors under the CFTA, the continental free trade area. And we've actually done a study that has shown that promoting tourism in Africa can also lead to, it's one of the ways that you can promote trade in Africa, in the sense that an increase in trade, an increase in tourism leads to an increase in trade and not vice versa. So to talk about the continental free trade area, it will be important that we start talking about tourism, and of course, encouraging the community-based initiatives to start developing tourism for the African market. I would like to thank you very much, and I submit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey, for this African perspective. And I very much appreciate your insistence on this balanced approach towards sustainability, stressing both the environmental, social, and economic perspectives on this issue. So next in line is Mr. Alejandro Barrera of the UN World Tourism Organization. And please, Alejandro, if you could tell us something on how the WTO is working on sustainability in general, just a few words. And then if you can address in more detail how the UNWTO is promoting gender equality in the tourism sector, with maybe some specific references on activities in this field in the Americas. Please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Nano, for the question, and thank you also for the invitation. I will go directly to the gender equality issue because I think it is the most important. Our intervention in the sustainability world was already developed, but UNWTO is committed to enhancing the positive impact of tourism development on women's lives and contributing to the achievement of the 5th Sustainable Development Goal, which, as all well know, achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Since 2007, UNWTO has been working through its ethics, culture, and social responsibility department in partnership with UN Women and a range of external partners across the globe to bring gender issues to the forefront of the tourism sector, promoting gender equality and women's empowerment, and encouraging member states to mainstream gender issues in their respective tourism policies. In this respect, we have 2 tools. We have delivered 2 tools, and they can be seen in our website. The first one, which I want to refer, is the Global Report on Women in Tourism. We have already shared with the organizers the link to get this report from our website. This is the 2nd edition, and it is in English and Spanish, and you can get all those from the website. The report provides a comprehensive study on how tourism contributes to SDG 5 and provides recommendation to stakeholders with the tools they need to empower women in tourism. As you all know, 57% of the tourism workforce are women in the Americas, above the global average of 54%. However, access to education, precarious working conditions, particularly in the formal sector, and gender-based violence are some of the main barriers to women's empowerment in the regional tourism sector. The report also contains an action plan which provides concrete steps that will help actors, both private and public sectors, to boost tourism empowering potential for women. Policy makers, national and local governments, cooperatives, international organizations, NGOs in the tourism sector are called upon to endorse and implement this action plan within their respective organization. The second tool that you can already take from our website is the guidelines for inclusive recovery. In this behalf, we have already prepared these living guidelines, which are subject to revision as the health situation evolves and more information becomes available on the most effective ways to make tourism accessible and inclusive for all. We have one issue of this guide focused on women in tourism, and it was developed by UNWTO in collaboration with the UN Women. It's a response to the continuing crisis with UN Women, and it's it's an update based on the initial recommendations issued by UNWTO in May last year. These guidelines contain gender-responsive measures to the pandemic, including assistance for those in the informal tourism sector, and this is particularly relevant in the Americas. And for this November, next November, we, according to our program of work, we are expected to publish gender mainstream guidelines. And finishing with our two new projects. One is called Center Stage Women's Empowerment During the COVID-19 Recovery. We are implementing the recommendation of a global report during the recovery from COVID-19 in the sector in 3 pilot countries in the America: Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, and Mexico. The program addressed to the national tourism organizations, 10 businesses, entities, and 4 NGOs per country to implement a personalized action plan for gender equality during the recovery from COVID-19. The project is supported by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and for UN Women. Our part in this project consists in supporting our member states in five steps. Number 1, providing targeted training and capacity building measures, organizing training workshops for women, conducting surveys to produce concrete figures on the impact of COVID-19 on women's employment in tourism, reviewing the legal framework for women in each country, and also to have try to ensure the gender equality and women empowerment remain as a political priority during recovery. And our last project, if I have 1 minute, our last project is called Weaving the Recovery, Tejiendo la Recuperación, for indigenous women in tourism. It was selected as one of the most promising projects of the Paris Peace Forum last year. The aim of the project is to tackle the systemic socioeconomic inequalities faced by indigenous women in Guatemala, in Peru, and in Mexico. Weaving the Recovery, Tejiendo la Recuperación, will nurture traditional knowledge and collective well-being, providing to indigenous women with the skill they need to access different markets, trade ethically, and become leaders in the post-COVID-19 tourism recovery. This is all, Nano, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you, Alejandro, and for informing us about the very important initiatives the UNWTO is taking to promote gender equality in general and the Americas in particular. The following speaker is Ms. Michelle McLeod of the University of the West Indies, and she will say a few words on how island destinations can build more resilient tourism economies that can help to overcome external shocks like the COVID-19. And she's particularly well positioned to talk about this topic as she forms part of the COVID-19 task force of her university. Please, Michelle, go ahead for 5-6 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting the University of the West Indies to be part of this very informative and important forum as we continue to look at tourism recovery across the globe. The 2020 global pandemic has forced tourism destinations to rethink tourism systems and strategize to restart a major engine of growth for many Caribbean economies. Tourist generation has come to a standstill. Tourism destinations have placed travel restrictions, and these have resulted in what can be termed the transit route of tourism activities being in suspension. The cutting off of travel links, which facilitate regional and international tourism activities, has resulted in stark economic impacts through direct, indirect, and induced consequences for the tourism sector. Even the reopening of Caribbean tourism destinations has met with starts and stops because of the dynamic nature of the actor network of a pandemic that has brought on many health and safety challenges. Herein is the importance of resilience to build capacity to external shocks, including natural disasters and pandemics. Caribbean tourism destinations have to find ways to build resilience within the policy planning and tourism development activities to ensure sustainability of this vital industry for the Caribbean region. Regional tourism and health organizations, the Caribbean Tourism Organization based in Barbados, and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association based in Florida, have been working with the Caribbean Public Health Agency, CARPA, based in Trinidad and Tobago, and the University of the West Indies Global Tourism Resilience and Crisis Management Center, based in Jamaica, to build capacity in the Caribbean for tourism recovery. The University of the West Indies COVID-19 Task Force has a resource that can be found on its website to inform tourism recovery and to provide up-to-date information about the return of Caribbean tourism to its usual state of performance. Of vital importance to the recovery process is the state of human resources in the tourism and hospitality industries of the Caribbean region. The Caribbean Tourism Organization has mobilized with the Caribbean Development Bank its first ever regional tourism skills audit. This initiative will go a long way, which has in terms of resilience proofing the region's tourism industry. The Caribbean Public Health Agency has also launched the Caribbean Travelers Health Assurance Stamp for healthier tourism, and added to the stamp, there's a mobile app in order to train across the regions as tourism recover in health and safety standards. A multi-agency collaborative approach has to be the way forward to resilience-proof Caribbean tourism. Of utmost importance for rebounding Caribbean tourism will be the reinventing of the role of interregional air carriers to avert the negative consequences of the global decline in air transportation. An acceleration of the revision of CARICOM's multilateral air services agreement and liberalization of air transport service across the region will also facilitate building airlift capacity. The cruise industry must not be forgotten. The Caribbean has the greatest market share, an estimated 35% according to the Florida Caribbean Cruise Association. This 35% is of the global cruise market. An assessment of visitor arrivals of several Caribbean tourism destinations illustrate how important the cruise tourism industry is. So Caribbean cruise tourism needs to also restart and regain ground. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share a bit about how I see Caribbean tourism can build resilience to support tourism recovery. And I thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for this very important view from the Caribbean and how the Caribbean islands and economies can rebuild and strengthen the resilience of the tourism sector. Last but not least, I would like to pass the floor on to my colleague, Leda Peralta, and she's been doing some very important work on challenges and some good examples regarding the digital transformation of tourism SMEs, with specific reference to the experience of Central American countries. Is also an important avenue to increase the sustainability and resilience of the tourism sector. Leda, please go ahead for 5-6 minutes.
Thank you, Nano. Thank you for the invitation, and I think the issues addressed in this webinar are also very interesting. So as you mentioned, since last year, we've been studying what does it mean to digitally transform the tourism sector? And we have focused on micro and SME, not only because the pandemic has accelerated this digital revolution, but SMEs in the Central American and Dominican Republic region represent up to 99% of tourist service providers. So we reached over 300 enterprises, including in rural areas and owned or managed by women or elderly groups. And there are some great news. I think the most important finding, I think, is that MSMEs are innovative. They are not disruptive though, but they understand the importance of an online presence. They use online travel agencies, social media, instant messaging to communicate and sell mostly. However, more advanced uses of technology and data in their operations, in the management of the business, or in their sustainability are less frequent. They also rarely analyze the data they produce on their websites and social media, although they not always have access to these insights, which are kept by the digital intermediaries. Another good news is the high mobile penetration in the region, paired with the fact that mobile is the main tool used by tourists during their travel and in general to plan their trip. And this is especially important for SMEs in rural areas where fixed broadband penetration is very low. In terms of challenges, I think the main challenge is the persistent digital gap between developed and developing countries, which are tourists and destinations, which deepens specifically in rural areas among MSME, women, and the elderly. And these groups, MSMEs, rural areas, and women, make up the majority of the tourism sector in our region. So this gap in infrastructure, skills, and uses that we give to technology especially affects these groups and their businesses. And the pandemic has accelerated a digital revolution that Latin America and the Caribbean were already joining late. So even if the enterprises recognize the importance of technology and data, they face some challenges to actually implement it in their processes. We found 4 main challenges, all of them, women, rural areas, and low-income households face the strongest exclusion. The first one is infrastructure. There is low penetration, as I said, of fixed broadband and even lower fiber optic. Mobile broadband is higher, the penetration. It's around 80%, but most are prepaid plans. So this gives you a limited amount of data to have a meeting, for example, like this, to participate in a class like this. And also not all websites are responsive to mobile. So there's limited things that we can do on a mobile. Electricity infrastructure, especially in rural areas, also affects the stability of telecoms, and limited transportation infrastructure difficults the participation of rural areas in, for example, e-commerce. The second challenge would be digital skills and the types of uses we give to technology. Our region consumes internet to communicate through social media, phone or video calls, instant messaging, but we make very little use of internet to access government services, education and health information, to make payments or to shop online. We are also a net consumer of digital tools produced in other regions in a market that is showing monopolistic tendencies. Third, very strong financial exclusion, especially of MSMEs, women, and rural areas. There is a long debt of the traditional banking system with MSMEs, giving way to fintech developments that have actually been lately targeting SMEs. But this also causes difficulty not only to acquire the technology and the services, but also to actually innovate. Participation in OTAs, for example, require a bank account, card, options to withdraw cash. But we have companies that don't even have access to these tools. And last but not least is the structure of the SMEs. They are small businesses with limited time to innovate, to learn. This affects especially women who undertake a higher proportion of unpaid care work in the household and also unpaid work in the company. So this leads to companies making very limited use of the technology, not seeing other uses in their operations, in the professionalization of their staff, in their sustainability. And I would like to close very quickly with some areas that I think are very interesting in this digital transformation of SMEs. First, the B2B business, we saw very few linkages between companies. So that talks about a limited offer for the tourists in the destinations. So more linkages would lead to a deeper, more sophisticated, more interesting offer. Technology and data are very useful also for disaster risk reduction and management. And last but not least, I think the most important is research, development, and innovation. We have countries like Belize, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica that have a lot of information about their tourists. They are global participants, for example, Costa Rica in the ecotourism. So they could help solve the most pressing challenges of tourism: food waste, single plastic use, the carbon footprint of air transportation. So these areas could lead the region to stop being a consumer of digital services and maybe produce some disruptive innovations for the global tourism. Thank you for your time, and I'm here for any time left for questions.
Thank you, Leda, for this very interesting view regarding the digital transformation, in particular of small and medium-sized enterprises in the tourism sector in the countries where the UN ECLAC Office of Mexico has been working. Now with this, we come to the end of this seminar on tourism trends and sustainability. And it's impossible to give a good synthesis in just a few minutes, but I would like to recall that we've heard that tourism numbers are still way down to the pre-COVID crisis, the 2019 numbers. But we see that there's specifically an uptake in domestic tourism, and some countries are doing very well in receiving international tourists as well. And then we've heard several very interesting insights on how to increase the sustainability of the tourism sector, with emphasis on SMEs, on how SMEs can improve their resilience in part through the work of community-based enterprises. We've heard initiatives regarding gender equality with regard to the reduction of plastics, and also, as Leda said, how the digital transformation can also help to overcome some of these of the challenges and the increase in sustainability. So with this, I would like to thank again the panelists for having accepted their participation in today's session, and also the attendees, the participants, for listening to this section. And again, this session will be recorded and can be viewed later on in YouTube. I would also like to invite you to our next session, which starts exactly in 25 minutes. And the topic of that webinar is how to promote the participation of developing countries in IT-enabled services trade. I thank you all very much, and I hope you can listen and participate in some of the next panels today and tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.